What's up everyone, welcome to Akuma's Arsenal, and today we're talking about watches and World War I. World War I was the first truly modern war. You had huge front lines, you had many different technologies being advanced very rapidly in this era, whether it's medical technologies, whether it was weapons, artillery, tanks, airplanes, all sorts of things. The modern hospital system was developed from the developed from the Western Front during World War I. One thing that is overlooked, I feel, about World War I is watches in World War I. Watches were essential for timing things during the Great War. As a commander in the Great War, you did not want a pocket watch. You just did not want one. It was impractical. If you had a rifle in your hand, you're in the middle of a battle and you need to advance. Specifically, you have to leave this area and attack the next trench at specifically 4:30 a.m. or whatever, right? You're in the middle of fighting. You don't have the time to go reach in your pocket and take out a pocket watch, right? It's just completely impractical. While wristwatches were worn by men before the war, for example, ballooners, bicyclists, men had pocket watches. Wearing wristwatches before World War I was seen as effeminate. But once World War I kicked off, watches became popular among the officers, and when you see battle-hardened soldiers coming home from one of the most horrible wars in history, you can't call those men effeminate for wearing a wristwatch. So the wristwatch became, socially acceptable for men to wear. Watches during the early part of the war were completely aimed at officers. Pocket watches in cockpits, in trenches, didn't make any sense. Officers were issued pocket watches, so they had to buy their own quote-unquote trench watches. Hence, the term trench watch was born. In Now It Can Be Told, the war correspondent Philip Gibbs said this about a battle in Belgium in 1915. Now, this is long, but I want to give you an image, a visual image of how wristwatches were used during the war, why they were so important to the officers at the front line, and how in the early stages wristwatches were used when they became popular for men. The men deployed before dawn broke, waiting for the preliminary bombardment which would smash a way for them. The officers struck matches now and then to glance at their wristwatches. What they're talking about is, lighting a match, using the light to see your wristwatch, because, some watches didn't have lume. I'll read that part again. The officers struck matches now and then to glance at their wristwatches, set very carefully to those of the gunners. Then, our artillery burst forth with an enormous violence of shell fire, so that the night was shattered with the tumult of it. The men listened and waited. As soon as the guns lengthened their fuses, the infantry would advance. Then the time came. The watch hand pointed to the second which had been given for the assault to begin, and instantly, to the tick, the guns lifted and made a curtain of fire round the chateau of Hooge, beyond the Menin Road, 600 yards away. Time! The company officers blew their whistles, and there was a sudden clatter from trench spades slung to rifle barrels, and from men girdled with hand grenades, as the advancing companies deployed and made their first rush forward. What's the tactic I was talking about earlier that was extremely the tactic that made watches extremely important was this tactic. It was called let me just try to remember the name of it, the Creeping Barrage. So what your artillery would do was, so you had the enemy trenches in front of you. What the artillery would do was they'd let kind of like, imagine. So the first round of fire would be commenced at a certain time and end at a certain time, and that would be take out the barbed wire in no man's land. Then they would bomb the next trench, and as they were bombing the next trench, you would advance forward, and whenever they were just done bombing that trench, you would enter and take that trench. And while you're doing that, they would be bombing the next trench, and just as that trench ended, you would enter in and take the next trench, right? And timing was essential to making sure that would go well. If you were too early, well, you got killed by your own artillery. And that happened. It wasn't an uncommon thing, right? And if you were too late, well, you gave the enemy time to get out of the trenches, prepare the defenses, man the guns, pull the rifles. So if you were too late, you're going to have a hard-fought battle ahead of you. Literally, all watches during this period had a smooth sub-seconds hand. If you're familiar with, let me just try to think of some ideas here. I think the Patek Calatrava, some of them, maybe the 90s versions or the versions in the 80s, I can't remember if the modern ones have it. A sub-seconds hand is basically, you take the hand out of the center of the dial and you place it just below, usually at the 6th position. So I'll put a picture up, you'll know what I'm talking about. And yeah, that was the style of the era, and I think that has to do with a lot of the pocket watch conversions, and the people just thought, why not just make the sub-seconds hands like that? I don't know why they used the sub-seconds hand. Sir Douglas Haig, I'm not for sure his official title, but basically the leader of the British Armed Forces, wore a wristwatch. And speaking of the British were the first to really start wearing wristwatches. Since Swiss imports were heavily taxed, British watchmakers, British watch manufacturers, and British sellers of watches had basically a small relative boom during World War I, because the government and the military was providing these officers with pocket watches. They didn't want pocket watches, they wanted wristwatches, so they had to go out and buy them. And there was a book, and I actually posted this in UGWC. It was the Scottish Officer's Kit, and the very first thing on the list is a luminous wristwatch with unbreakable glass. Interesting, right? I mean, the very first thing on the list was, no kidding, a wristwatch. H. Williams said this. He was basically, I think he was like the head of like some horological foundation, or head of some wristwatch company. The public is buying the practical things of life. Nobody can truthfully contend that The public is buying the practical things of life. Nobody can truthfully contend that a watch is a luxury. And I find that super duper interesting. I'm not exactly for sure, but I wonder if pocket watches before this time period were considered a luxury. But, this is the time where a watch, after World War I, during World War I, a watch is considered a necessary tool of life, of modern life. And, that kind of leads us to today, right? Where we buy wristwatches, now we have smartphones to, check the time, and, a watch then, and for most of, the 20th century and even the 21st, a wristwatch was necessary. Interesting, the luminous paint used in these wristwatches was radioactive. So I mean, I think that's kind of interesting. You look at your wristwatch and there's this radioactive substance, providing light so you can check the time. Yes, and hold on a sec, gotta find these notes. Yeah, we talked about the war. During the war, the British had a 33% tax on foreign goods. The Swiss did not want to sell watches in Britain. British watch manufacturing boomed. We talked about that. And we're gonna end it there, but we're not gonna just end it there. We're gonna start wrapping it up now. So, what happened after World War I? What did World War I do for wristwatches? It made wristwatches socially acceptable for men to wear, because before then, only women wore wristwatches. It also advanced wristwatch manufacturing to be a little bit more robust. These things could not be fragile at all, whatsoever. A lot of the companies that existed in World War One to serve the military market died out after World War One. After World War One, a lot of British watch manufacturing halted, and that's why you even see today, the only truly British brand I can even think of that even claims to be from Britain is Christopher Ward. And during World War One, there was a lot of companies that sold wristwatches. After World War One, there's a huge surplus of wristwatches. A lot of businesses went out of business, and British watch manufacturing fell. World War One really did revolutionize and change a lot of the ways we did things, and one of those things was the way we viewed wristwatches. And I think it's very important to study World War One, because if you really want to understand the foundations of our modern world, you need to understand that it was born in fire and born in the blood of young men in Europe, or not even young men, just men of Europe, going and dying for stupid reasons. If you're interested in World War One, I recommend the Great War YouTube channel. They provide basically a week by week assessment of what is going on in World War One exactly 100 years ago. So 100 years ago in this day, various things were happening during World War One, whether it was in the Western Front and other types of fronts around the world. I highly recommend their YouTube channel, and I will leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. Also, if you want to look at World War One watches on eBay, check the link in the description. Just look through. You can find these watches from about, I'd say the average is around $300. I stumbled across a Rolex World War One wristwatch. If you're interested, click the link, take a look at some of the World War One wristwatches. And that's where we end the video, guys. Thank you very, very much for watching, and I'll come out.